Well, good morning, everybody. This is Celeste Carmichael, and I want to welcome you to the Building Campus County Connection webinar series. We're really excited to have you as a part of our program today. Today's topic is women in agriculture, or engaging extension work with women in agriculture. I think it's a topic that is getting a lot of play lately, and there's a lot of really great work happening here within New York and across the country. So we're very excited to have you as a part of that today. I'm Celeste Carmichael. I work within the Cooperative Extension Administrative Unit on program development topics and accountability practices, and I'm very excited to be a part of, to have you as a part of today's program. So if you've been a part of the Campus County Connection webinar before, you know that what we're trying to do is just help to showcase some topics that really demonstrate some good integration between research and extension, and that solid foundation of extension working on some practices where there's needs in communities and help where extension can help to enrich and enlighten the work of communities and lives. So one of the perennial challenges identified by cooperative extension educators and faculty and staff on campus is the difficulty of keeping current with people and programs. So this webinar series is just intended to help broaden your horizons and help people understand some of the things that are people that are getting involved in programs. So I invite you to set your chat to respond to all participants. And that way everybody will know the kinds of questions that you may have. I also invite you to chat in any questions that you have at any time. We'll make sure that we bring those up. I'll pause our presenters just to make sure that your questions get some answers. If you have audio issues, or if there's something that's not working for you or doesn't look right, do let me know, and you can send a note directly to me, the host, or you can send it to an individual. So I'm Celeste Carmichael, so send it to me so I can work on fixing those little things behind the scenes as the host of today's series. So to get us started, we have a poll I'm going to open up right now, just asking if you've held any workshops for women only. And as you're answering that, I'm going to ask Bonnie Collins to do a brief introduction. And Bonnie, I'm going to keep it on the chat for just a few moments. Well, the chat and the poll before we go out to the slides, but if you want to just kind of introduce the topic and introduce yourself while people are answering the poll, that would be terrific.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Bonnie Collins. I am the Farm Business Manager, Resource Educator, both in Oneida and Madison County, starting January of this year. So welcome. As folks have known, I've been really interested in the topic working with women in agriculture. So really, my next goal really is to help the educators that are interested in working with this audience. So there's a lot of research out there, there's a lot of information, and my goal today is to try to introduce you to some of the other great women we have out there across the country that is actually working with women in agriculture. So our first presenter is Madeline Schultz from Iowa State University. She's going to talk about the census and the research about women in agriculture, and then we're going to go on to Mary Peabody from the University of Vermont, and then Sheila Marshman from Morrisville State College and the head of the New York Agro Women. I'm not going to spend too much time. Again, this is just trying to see who would be interested in working with women, and at the end, my goal is to try to think how we can connect with one another and move forward on this topic. So next slide. All right, so we've had the poll, so I see Celeste has the answers introduced up here, which is really good, and we hope that we can bring more folks into this working with this particular audience. Next slide. So my objective today is to really assist educators in working with women, identifying those needs, enhance the capacity, connect in communicating with this audience, and at the end I'd also like to show the great resources we have available and the training that will be coming up for some of the programs that we have. Next slide. So as you can see what our focus is today, the role of women in agriculture, awareness for the specific training, and then hopefully bringing you some practical examples and some information. So Celeste, I would click right on next two slides. We talked about the focus today. And Madeline Schultz, and I believe, I can't see, but do we have a connection with Madeline? In sound.
Madeline, can you unmute yourself? She should be able to. Let's see.
Well, hi, everyone. This is Madeline. Can you hear me all right now?
We can hear great. Thank you, Madeline.
Oh, fabulous. Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to be here. Happy to get this webinar started out on women in agriculture. So, Celeste, you'll be advancing the slides for me. Is that right?
That's correct. So just tell me next slide and I'll drive.
Okay. Well, we're going to move through these slides fairly quickly, so hold on to your hat and let's roll. We'll go to the next slide there and then go to the next slide. Okay, just wanted to get things started out here. This is a picture of my daughter, and this is a comment that she wrote actually in a grant letter for Mary Peabody, and I think it speaks a little bit to why we're all talking about educating women in agriculture, because they are still facing some challenges when they are out there working in their barns. So let's go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit about leading the way, women in the census of ag, and the changing roles on the farm, and then how Annie's project is helping to educate farm and ranch women across the country. So thank you. Next slide. So this is some information from Sheryl Sandberg. Many of you may have heard of her book called Lean In, or she's writing about women in leadership. So as you can see here, even though women have been 50% of the college graduates since the 1980s, there is still a huge leadership gap between men and women. So let's go to the next slide and see how that looks for agriculture. So in agriculture, again, we've been seeing an increase in our universities of women studying with agricultural degrees. And one of the statistics I found that demonstrates their leadership is their cooperative board leadership. Only 3% of cooperative board members are women. So hopefully we can take some steps to improve this and get women into more leadership roles. Next slide. So how are women leading in agriculture? They're managing complex farm businesses. They are serving on local, regional, state boards, maybe a water district, maybe a farm bureau board, things like that. They are innovating food production and conservation methods. We see a lot of women very interested in local foods, very interested in various conservation methods, interested in transitioning the farm to the next generation. We know they're leading in agribusiness as well. So here's a slide that's about Katie Althoff, and I just put her in here as an example. She recently flew out to your great state of New York and was on the television station there talking about turkey. And she was an Annie's Project participant back in 2010 as a newlywed, new to the farm, and look at her go now with everything that she's doing, communicating about agriculture. So she's just a great example of a young woman in agriculture taking a leadership role. Next slide, please. So now let's move into some statistics about the women in agriculture. And here are a few from the Census of Agriculture. And what that first line shows there is the total number of farm operators, both men and women. And you can see that from 2007 to 2012, there was actually a decline in the numbers of overall farm operators. And then there was a decline in the number of women farm operators as well. Next slide, please. Now, when we dig down a little deeper and we look at the principal operators, those who are the primary operator of that farm, there is an even greater drop. So that's a little bit concerning, something that kind of came out of the 2012 census that was a bit of a surprise. Let's go to the next slide. So look at this trend line. Since 1978, when the Census of Agriculture started counting women purposefully, the trend line has been going up. More and more women counted in the Census of Agriculture. So what happened in 2012? Why did we see that drop? So that is something for us as educators to consider as we go about our work. Next. One of the reasons might be age, and this is a slide talking about age. As you can see here, we've got the average age of all women farm operators is 60 years. There's not that many in those lower categories, under 25 on up to 44 years. So we do want to do our part as educators to bring those younger women into agriculture. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you a few stats from Iowa on farmland tenure. And this is interesting, and I think it's probably the same situation in New York. But maybe you could look at your stats there. So in Iowa, 47% of the farmland is owned by women. And not only is it owned by women, but it's 29% of that farmland is owned by those who are 65 and over. So what this says is that there's going to be a lot of land changing hands, and how are we as educators going to facilitate that? Let's look at the next slide. So not only are we dealing with land changing hands, but we're talking about leased land too. So 52% of the leased land in Iowa is owned by women. So they have a big influence over who is going to be managing that land and running that land. So it's very important to keep those things in mind, that land ownership and management is a big concern to women in agriculture. Next slide, please. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and just talk about how women's roles have been changing briefly. So women have always earned money. As you can see here, this lady is selling chickens in a market back in 1938. So that part hasn't really changed, but what has changed is women's roles in the farm, and they are now considered more primary owners and operators of those farm businesses. Let's take a look at the next slide. So we as Extension educators have shifted how we view women on the farm as well. We used to do extension programs that emphasized child rearing, maybe home canning, food preservation, things like that. Really their role in the home, which is definitely a very important and critical role in farm families. But today we're shifting and kind of going along with our changing roles of our women in agriculture. Next slide, please. So here's a photo of some women at a field day and just kind of talking about how their roles have changed, you know, and this woman in this quote here is talking about how she, you know, found the land to purchase and she did the bidding and now she's managing the land. So we're seeing more and more women take very active roles in things like this. Next slide, please. And again, these women are looking for opportunities to come together to discuss farming. And this quote is talking about how men often have places to go to discuss farming. But maybe sometimes what happens when a lady goes into the local co-op to talk about the grain prices, all of a sudden the conversation changes to the lemon pie that she had at the bake sale on Sunday. So how do we get over that, and how do we bring women together to have these conversations about their farm businesses? Next slide, please. So here's just a few things from the data, from what we know about women. What kinds of educational opportunities do they value? Well, we know that they're juggling farming and non-farming careers. 2 out of 3 farm women have off-farm jobs. We know that we need to help them in transitioning away from farming, either because of retirement, age, or other situations they may be in. We need to help them begin new farm businesses. There's not a lot of younger women involved in agriculture, and if we can encourage that will be great for our country and food security and all of that. And we know they are managing land, and they have a lot of questions about that. And we know they are working in partnership with other family members or partners. And sometimes those partnerships can be a challenge. And how do we help them with that? Next slide, please. So we have a few more slides here. Here's Annie's project. It was developed by Ruth Hambleton in Illinois. I'm going to kind of go through these quickly because I'm running out of time. So next slide, please. There really was an Annie, and you can look up her story on our website and learn more about her. But she was a farm woman who kept really great records, and those records helped that farm stay in the family. So that is where the program is named from. Next slide, please. There are 4 core values of Annie's project, and we really put these core values to work in all of the classes: safe harbor, connection, discovery, and guided intelligence. And these values just really help women to process information and learn from one another as well as the instructors. Next slide, please. These are key principles, and mainly we're going to provide unbiased research-based information. That's really our niche as university educators. That is really what we can bring to this audience of learners. Next slide, please. Just a quick story here. This is Janice. She was in one of my classes last fall, and she learned all about all the changes resulting from the 2014 Farm Bill. And she was so proud at the end of the class to tell everyone that she went down to the Farm Service Agency office and took care of all of her business. She had all of her paperwork in order, and just let those folks at the FSA know she knew what she was doing because she had been to Annie's project. So it's just great to see her excitement. Next slide, please. And here's Nicole. She developed a business plan within our class and was very proud of that. That was a couple of years ago, and her business is rocking and rolling now, so really exciting to see that. Next slide, please. Here's a farm transition story where the younger and older couple, mom and daughter-in-law, came to the class together and have since developed their farm transition plan, and even thinking about that 3rd generation in the picture here. So again, these are some of the reasons that we are working with farm and ranch women across the country. Next slide, please. We'll take questions later on, but I thank you for your interest, and it's been nice visiting with you all here this morning.
Great. Thank you, Madeline, so much for that. So it was wonderful. Madeline talked about the changing roles that have taken over time. So next I'd like to introduce Mary Peabody from the University of Vermont. And go ahead, Mary. Thank you.
Mary, can you hear us okay?
Hi, can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay, great. My button must have gotten stuck. So go ahead. Thanks, Bonnie, for inviting me. And Laura, if you can go ahead and just advance to the next slide, please. Then, yeah, there you go. So this is very colorful. This is a continuum that we started working with in the mid-90s when the Women's Agricultural Network first started. And basically, the things that you see in those white diamonds are key decision points in the maturation process of growing a business. And it's pretty much the same for any business regardless of whether the primary operator is male or female. But one of the important points is that as we do our needs assessment and as we begin to think about, what information do we need to process and pass along to these farmers, it's really important for us to first be very clear about which box it fits in and to try to be very specific about what it is that we're doing. So, we spend some time trying to make sure that we're offering things completely along the continuum, and that the things that we're offering fit in one box and one box only, so that we don't throw so much information at these women that they begin to look like deer in the headlights. So next slide, please. So this is the information that farmers tend to come to us and ask for. You can see that there's an awful lot of information there. Women are no different than men in terms of their information needs. But I want to talk about the dark green circles because that's where things get a little bit different for us. And one of the things that we see women coming to us and asking for is really, although they don't label it, is support. And this can be in the form of just helping them build confidence, or it can be in the form of helping them get connected to networks, because we very often work with women who do not come from a traditional farm background, maybe have newly relocated to the region, and do not have the connections. They don't know who to pick up the phone and ask for when, very often they don't even know about extension. We did a survey about 15 years ago where a ridiculous number of the people that were coming to us had never heard of extension or USDA at all. The second one, nope, I'm sorry, just keep going back. I was, thanks. The next bubble is the reality checks, which is, helping them both not over-plan or under-plan, but trying to get realistic in terms of what they can manage in terms of the feasibility of a business, in terms of what to expect in terms of income, and really for women what to expect in terms of how much time they can commit, because as you heard Madeline say, a high number of them have off-farm jobs, and then they have other family constraints that are rolling into that. Managing risk for women predominantly centers in one key area, and that is sort of mechanization of the farm and learning how to safely operate equipment, learning when to mechanize the farm, when to make that investment. And just as an aside, this is one of the few areas where we have women very clearly tell us that they want to be in a woman-only learning environment for these kinds of workshops. So for what it's worth, I'll pass that along. The last one is business communication, and again, this largely comes from the way that many women are socialized as they sort of enter the workforce and sort of grow up and are schooled, and that they don't necessarily learn good negotiation skills. They don't necessarily learn how to effectively ask for what it is that they want and be clear in what they want. And I think Madeline's story about the FSA officer is one that we've seen played out many, many times in terms of, women really needing to learn how to be very clear and very assertive in the way that they communicate without going over the line. Okay, thanks, Celeste. Next one. So this is sort of our key questions that sort of drives when we're developing a course or a workshop or a learning opportunity, is really trying to figure out what is it that we're going to have to help. And the take home from this is that it really depends what stage a person is in, and you can see that going down the left-hand column, whether they're just a pre-business startup or whether they're in the planning stages or implementation or financing. And then across the top, the other thing that plays a huge role in what they're going to need and how they're going to need it delivered is where they are. So we have new recruits who are generally young women who very often are coming out of College of Ag and Life Science, although not always. So they're educated, but they're young and they have typically no assets, no equity, and very little experience. Then we have the career changers who are anywhere from 35 to 55 who come to us having left very often a professional career, and they sometimes have assets. They have work experience, albeit not in agriculture necessarily. And they have had some life experience, and they also have, some broader understanding of how the world works and how markets work. And then we have the matriarchs, which are the older women who typically live in a family-operated farm, and their issues tend to lie more along with family communications and transferring farm and what's going to happen to their farm and ensuring their own personal financial security. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is it. So basically, just to sum up everything that I have just sort of told you so quickly, is that factors that impact sort of the needs assessment and all of those little bubbles that I showed you in the earlier slide are the age of the person. Younger people have, are like sponges. They have an immense capacity to learn everything. Family status is a huge thing. Whether somebody's starting a business, and we do work with a lot of women who are starting businesses on their own, as well as people who are starting with a partner or a spouse, people who are moving into family-owned businesses, which is a little tricky, trying to figure out the right match when you're moving into an existing business and how to establish a role for yourself. Prior experience and work history is really important because you have to find the right balance in terms of delivering education. Women are very keen to have their experience honored and respected. And so, again, with those career changers who have come and have had, 15 or 20 years in medicine or education or law, they come with a lot. Many of them have even owned businesses in the past. They just don't know anything about agriculture. So the way that we deliver the information is very different than to somebody who knows nothing about business, has very little life experience, and also doesn't know anything about agriculture. And the level of their current assets. And for women, this, we don't work with very many women who have unlimited assets. I will say that flat out. We work with a lot of women who have very limited resources, and that's always a challenge because, as you know, particularly in the Northeast, land is very expensive, so getting onto the ground can be an extreme hurdle for women who are starting out without a lot to invest. But those are sort of the realities. And so those are the four kinds of things that we like to take into account when we're thinking about the needs of our farmers and how best to provide the information. Because at least in our experience since, in the last 25 years or so, it's not that the information needs are strategically different for women, it's that the way that they need to receive it is a bit different. So that's
Mary?
it. Yeah.
Mary, this is Celeste. I'm just going to jump in for a second and ask a question if I can.
Sure.
So is there a certain way that you assess the needs as somebody new comes in the door? I mean, are they surveyed, or do they ask us a certain series of questions? Do you sit down with them and talk in small groups? One of the things that we talk about in program development all the time is needs assessment. So learning how others do needs assessment is important. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. Then the answer is it depends. We do a lot of online education now, and we always have an intake form, AKA a registration form, and we try to get some basic information about exactly this: age, family status, prior experience, work history, assets, things like that. Just a basic sketch. Now, as you know, the longer that you stay with somebody, the higher the trust level and the more information they're willing to share with you. So sometimes at the very beginning, at the very first phone call, the information they're willing to share is pretty limited. So we work with what they're willing to give us. As we move forward, then we begin to get a little bit more information about sort of their life history and their past experience and their assets and their financial situation. So, the answer is that we have sort of an embedded database that we collect information, and we try to move very quickly beyond just sort of your name and your email address. But we sort of let the clients decide when they're willing to share.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much, Mary. All right, next, Mary did speak about the support and the connection that we need for women, and now we have Sheila Marshman that will talk about the effective communication. Thank you, Sheila.
Okay, good morning, everyone. You can skip right to the slide that says preparation, if you would, please. One more. Okay, so in preparing for today's discussion, I did my scholarly research on women in agriculture, or just women communicating in general, interviewed women in production agriculture and agribusiness. I like the statistic that was given about that 2 out of every 3 women are now working off the farm. And I interviewed professionals who work directly with women in agriculture. And once again, production and agriculture business. And what I found was very similar concerns, and not just that the concerns are the same, but the implications are the same. And what I want to focus just a little bit on is the importance of recognizing that there's a lot of stress out there. And I'm not going to say stress because the situations are bleak, but stress because the stress of expansion, the stress of moving the next generation into the business, the stress of land ownership. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. When I talk about stress, I'm talking about the stress that's occurring because of the consolidation that we're seeing within the agriculture industry as well. And so with women in particular, the stress does lead to a greater risk of heart disease and depression. I think that a lot of people are not willing to talk about depression, and I think it's very important that we're open about that it exists. And it is very prevalent in the agriculture industry. You can go to the next slide, please. Oh, whoops, stress. Sorry about that, I missed that. So that was my slide about stress. And you can click one more time there. So when we're talking about these stressors a little bit, I liked how the previous speaker had the slide about the woman with the chickens going to market. So now, you know, what we see women have the responsibilities of the production side, of the marketing side, very involved in the legal affairs, very involved in the financial management. So oftentimes what we're seeing is a lot of women who work off the farm and have day jobs, but they're also very involved in these areas that I just spoke about, which I think the Annie's Project labels them as the risk management areas. And let's not forget that in addition to the off-farm jobs, and in addition to being involved in the farm within these areas, let's not forget that they still have the responsibility of the household, and they still have the responsibility for the family. So I think what we're seeing is some dynamic women out there wearing many hats. Kudos to them, but it does cause a fair amount of stress. And I'm going to have you skip over my next slide. It's a cute story, but we don't have time to tell it. We could come back to it later if we do. So focusing on that issue of stress, I want to talk about how that women handle stress. And we're all very familiar with the fight or flight, which basically when people face stress, they're going to fight. They're going to fight it or they're going to avoid it, which is referred to as flight. And you can click one more time. But there is research, and I put my references at the back of the slide, that say that women actually have a tendency to tend or befriend. And so when women are stressed, they look to care for their children, they look to care for their animals, and they look to care for the land. The other thing that women do on the befriending side is they seek out support networks, which I think is something that is we're finding with the New York Agri-Women organization, is that we see the opportunity for women to come together to discuss what is happening in their businesses and as a way to learn from one another. And also when I spoke to extension educators in preparing for today, they told me that women are more willing to speak about expansion, about the challenges that are occurring, and about the opportunities that are involved in the agriculture. So they're a lot more open than are the men. And so when we talk about social support, you can go to the next slide. I found a nice quote from the Mental Health Foundation. Women's friendships with other women help protect their mental health, providing a source of support, particularly in hard times or at times of loss or change. mentally healthy women generally speak about their feelings more than men and more often have stronger social networks of friends and family. And so I think that's just a good way of saying that projects like Annie's Project and New York Agri-Women or American Agri-Women are a great reason to exist, is because we are more willing to talk, and that it goes along with the mental health thing. I have a great quote on the next slide. I love it. I was a student, you can click, yep. I was a student in the London School of Economics way back when Madeleine Albright was in office, and she had this great quote, "There's a special place in Down Under for women who don't help other women." And I'm pretty sure she was not referring to Australia. So what are the concerns that when I interviewed women or when I reflected back, you can go to the next slide, the concerns that when I interviewed women that they had, or from my experience with Agri-Women, what I found. First, we want to talk about money. And sometimes when we think about agriculture in a very traditional sense, the thing is not having enough money. But the other concern out there is what to do with the money that you have. Where to invest it? Should we be investing in more production agriculture? Should we be diversifying? And all of the risk associated with that. So I want to stress that the money issue is not having it, it's what to do with the amount of money that we have. Very common overriding theme, of course, was children. What are the future of my children when it comes specifically to this business? Is there going to be an opportunity for all of my children? And so when we're looking at making decisions on these farms, oftentimes the husband may be looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, the business is all right now, we're in balance, whereas the spouse might be saying, but what about the children? What about the next generation? We need to make decisions now that are going to benefit them down the road. So I think there's definitely a kind of a difference there when it comes to men and women. Another big one that is very prevalent is this issue of health insurance. Health insurance for themselves and health insurance for their children. I recently spoke to a woman who's married to a farmer who was offered another job, and she said, when I was thinking about making my career decision, I want to make sure that we have health insurance for my family. Health insurance is very expensive, very costly for the farm, and frankly, including myself, many of us work off the farm for health insurance. The time with the spouse and the time with the family, I think that this is often referred to as, how do we find balance in our lives? I want to go back to that, these two out of three women who are working off the farm, they also have responsibilities on the farm that are related to, high levels of marketing, high levels of dealing with the employees, the legal aspect, and the financial aspect. So on top of that, we're expected to care for the children, and that makes it very difficult to have time to communicate with the spouse as well. The in-laws, that's just a common theme, and then overall security associated with the farm. On to the next slide. I did talk a little bit about women and money. Last week I ran into a woman who, her husband made the decision to sell the cows without consulting with her. And she said to me, she said, Sheila, I've worked my whole life on the farm, yet I have no Social Security. So at the age of 55, she's looking for her first job off the farm. And one of the reasons why she's doing it is so that she can start building up Social Security. At first, I thought to myself, this can't be possible in the year 2015 that we still have situations like that. But the more that I explored it, the more that I came to realize that that is a reality that was not unique to this woman's situation. It's not all glory with what to do with our money. I do want to also talk about personal debt. Personal debt versus farm debt. When we're looking at concerns that women have or things that are happening on the farm, I think in traditional sense, or at least I always thought about the farm having debt. But what we're starting to see more and more of is personal debt, which this makes sense because a lot of our businesses are now structured as LLCs or in the or corporations, and the individual owners take draws. And when that draw isn't enough to meet the needs of the chosen lifestyle, a lot of farm families have chosen credit card debt, or now have credit card debt. And you can switch to the next slide on that, please. Next slide, yep. And so here are some statistics about average credit card debt, $15,611. From my own experience, I have found that farm families are not, they're also included in that. A lot of our farm families have credit card debt, and a lot of our students, we're graduating students with debt. Probably this is one of my biggest concerns for many operations, is the amount of debt that we are sending students home with. You know, my all-time classic was a student who was returning to a 50-cow dairy with $30,000 worth of student loan debt. And that did not include his own credit card debt accumulated from college or his vehicle payment. So again, this subject of debt doesn't have, it's size neutral. It doesn't happen just to large farms or to small farms. We see our families accumulating debt. That really scares me. Even some of our most successful farms, I think that it's safe to say that we have some that are living beyond their means, and that is causing stress.
Okay.
My next
Sheila,
slide.
if you could, yep, if we're got about 2 minutes.
Okay, so then I
you.
just had a quick slide there on the in-laws a little bit. When you're working with farm families, I think it's really important to set aside boundaries or help women set boundaries. I just have a little statement here that if you farm with your family, so if you farm with them, meaning the in-laws, and live next to them, make sure there's a farm shop in between the houses. That's just another way of saying that when you're working with farm women, please help them establish boundaries. You can go to my next slide, and I will finish up with that one. The in-laws, I think this fits in very well to the conversation about that women are more willing to talk. I'm a firm believer that the secret behind every good farm family is a better psychologist. And I think that women are more willing to talk to somebody from the outside than are men. And my kitchen rule, I have a rule, but I always tell the students there's only room for one woman in every kitchen. What I'm really saying is there is that boundaries, and it's very important that women have their own identity in the farm family. You can skip to the next one. And you can go to the next one just for the sake of time. Early in the first presentation, the conversation was had about Sheryl Sandberg. There is a wonderful 15-minute TED Talk that Sheryl Sandberg has done relating to women in their careers. I think it's very relevant to women in agriculture, and I encourage everyone to listen to that. My next two slides, we can skip through those and move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Sheila, thank you so much.
Okay.
Sheila did bring up the point about the stress, and I think the risk management in agriculture and trying to work, again, them working off the farms and on farms. And again, I think the point of seeking out support and networking, again, as educators, we want to network together, and our job is to provide some of the resources. So I have Erica Fernane up next, and she's going to talk about some resources, and she's going to share her time with Laura Basula from Broome County, who is also a local educator. So we'll start out with Erica.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to apologize in advance in case there's a bit of background noise here. I've got my two kids home with me today. You can go ahead and skip to the next slide. So I work for the Cornell Small Farms program. I coordinate the online courses for the Northeast Beginning Farmer Project. Keep going, Celeste. And I wanted to point out some resources today that are not specific to women, but are helpful to anybody who is getting started in farming. We seem to particularly serve an audience that is, I would say it's primarily folks who do not have a farming background. So there's a lot of people, as many of you probably already know, a lot of people coming into farming from lots of other careers, and they kind of are starting at square one. So they need everything, the business planning, the production knowledge, and all of that. We offer a menu of online courses that I'll talk about in a bit, and I'm happy to say that about half of the people who take our online courses are women. And so we do see that there's a huge interest from women in leading, like being the sole manager or a primary manager of the farm business. Now, I'm not sure, it looks like some of this formatted a little funny, like there's a website at the bottom of this slide that's all in white, so you can't really read it. I wanted to point out the two main websites that we manage that have a lot of resources, and hopefully you're familiar with these websites, but I wanted to draw your attention to parts of the sites that you may not have visited before to make sure that you're aware of them. So if you go to smallfarms.cornell.edu and click on the resources button that's across the top of this page, go to the next slide, please, Celeste. Thanks. We have an enormous amount of different resources here, and if you have somebody coming to you and looking for specific information about raising some kind of livestock or growing vegetables or hops or whatever it is, it's likely that we have some information sources here that would help them. We try to compile the most useful resources that we've found. And then also this top link here, so this arrow is showing you that if you click on the resources menu, this is the stuff that you see on the right of the slide here are all the different things that you'll see. Our webinar and video archive has lots and lots of great information in it, particularly the on-farm renewable energy series that Violet Stone did a few years ago. Keep going, Celeste. I'll try to fly through these as quickly as possible. So then on to our next site. This is the sister site of the Cornell Small Farms program. It's the Northeast Beginning Farmer Project, and it looks like that website address also didn't come through on this slide. It's nebeginningfarmers.org, NE standing for Northeast. And I think probably many of you have already been to this site, but we found that a lot of folks don't see the main body of content on this site is actually in this Plan Your Farm section. So there's two ways to get there. The main menu has Plan Your Farm, and then this little box on the right side of the page says to. Keep going, Celeste. So if you go to the Plan Your Farm Hub, there's a series of tutorials that will help people walk through the first steps of planning out their farm, of thinking about shared goals, and figuring out what they're going to raise and assessing their land if they already have land, you know, figuring out what their marketing is going to be, all of those things that are so important. And there's a formula for each of these tutorials, which is if you click on, when you get into the Plan Your Farm Hub, the first thing you see are a series of the frequently asked questions that we get on that topic. And any of you who've been working with beginning farmers have probably experienced that one of the most common questions is, where can I get a grant to start my farm, or where can I get funding for my farm? And so those questions, we try to refer people to useful fact sheets and resources with more information about that here. And then there's a video with some farmers' voices, and then it leads straight to the tutorial. Go ahead, Celeste, to the next slide. When you get into the tutorial, there's some descriptive, like a narrative, some reading to help you understand the concepts. And then built into it, this is an example of a worksheet. So as you go through and read the concepts, you can then apply it to your own situation. So this lets farmers begin to plan out their farm. And then if they click the submit button, the worksheet will get emailed to them. Keep going, Celeste. And I'm just pointing out here, when you go to the Plan Your Farm Hub, this menu on the left are that's the list of all the different tutorials. So they kind of cover the major things that new farmers are thinking about: land, how to get it, and how to evaluate its quality for agriculture. Keep going, Celeste. Business planning, there's sample business plan templates and business plans that we've found online and posted here. Keep going. Learning how to farm, getting those, I mean, obviously with a website, we can't teach people how to produce various crops, but we try to give them some ideas and links to places where they could go to get hands-on experience and to get connected with networks. We really feel like that's one of the most critical things is, you know, figuring out who are their local networks of farmers or organizations, extension that can support them. Keep going. So, and then not necessarily on our website, although linked from our website are some other resources like we have a series of really fabulous videos on YouTube. If you go to the Cornell Small Farms Program YouTube channel, we had this excellent videographer who went to different farms in the Ithaca area and did some really detailed clips on those farms of exactly how they produce things. So we have a series of playlists. So if you go to our channel and then go to the playlists, you'll see lists of like how to raise pigs on pasture. And we've gotten fabulous feedback on those videos. They're really helpful for folks. Keep going. The Guide to Farming in New York is another one of our central resources. It's helpful for existing and experienced farmers as well as new farmers and has fact sheets that cover everything from financing to the regulations. And this guide is not meant to give you all the information that you need, but rather to refer you to exactly where to find the information. Okay, keep going. And then some other publications that we have that are also, if you go to Northeast Beginning Farmer Project website, the nebeginningfarmers.org, and click on publications, you'd find all of these. Keep going. And then our online courses that I mentioned earlier, we offer 14 online courses a year. We had 392 students this past online course season. And if you go to the online course homepage on our Northeast Beginning Farmers website, there's this handy little chart that helps people to decide which course is going to be most appropriate for them. Keep going. These are all 6-week online courses that are instructor-led. Bonnie is actually one of our instructors. And then we also have, I mentioned how important we think it is for people to get connected with organizations and networks to help them. If you go to the Who Can Help link on our website, there's a map of all of the service providers in the Northeast who have some kind of targeted assistance that they provide to beginning farmers. It could be legal assistance, marketing assistance, conferences, trainings, workshops, business planning, whatever it is. And if you would like to be added to that map and you're located in the Northeast, there is a form at the top of that page where you can request to be added. Keep going. Lots of opportunities to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and then we send out a twice-monthly electronic newsletter. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Erica. A lot of information in a short amount of time, so I appreciate that. Next, we have Laura up, and Laura's going to talk about some of the connections as an extension educator, what she's used, and probably talk a little bit about Annie's project. So thank you, Laura.
No problem. Thank you. And I hope everyone doesn't have too much fatigue from listening to everybody. I'm going to try to breeze through this pretty fast, so in case anybody has any questions for the other panelists, we have some time for that. So you can move ahead, Celeste. Okay, so when Bonnie asked me to talk, she kind of said that she'd like me to talk a little bit about Annie's project and then some of the other training, support, and resources for women in agriculture. So we started out hearing a little bit about Annie's project, and now I'm just going to bring it back and talk a little bit more about what Annie's project means for the women that have participated in it here in Broome County. And really what I saw was that the great parts of Annie's project were, you know, the community partners that the women were able to meet and interact with and learn about, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my next slide, that it really brought it back to basics. And I think that's something that Sheila referenced, is that, there's women at all ends of the spectrum that are part of agriculture. And so the really great thing in Annie's project is that it really just brings it back to the basics so that the women can really understand in the 5 areas of the risk management, which I hope I got correct. And if I didn't, then Bonnie will, I'm sure, be giving me a call as soon as we're done here. But what we help the women look at is help them understand and assess the risks as they relate to their farm operation in terms of the human or labor marketing, financial, transition, retirement planning, and production. And the way that this is done is through a set curriculum, as well as presenters and activities that then they can then bring back to relate specifically back to their farm. And that really is the most helpful for these women, is being able to take the concepts that we're teaching them in whatever way that it's being taught and allowing them to relate it directly to their farm operation, because that's really what they're looking to do, is help elevate their farm operations. So that has been going very well. It was a statewide effort last year. I think there was 13 counties that participated in that, and there will be a smaller version that will be running in the fall. And the great part about that is that when multiple counties come together to help with that, it really helps not only the educators who are participating, give them some support, but also sharing of presenters, and also just getting some real momentum behind getting the word out. There is another second level to Annie's project, which is called Managing for Today and Tomorrow, that really focuses on transition and retirement planning. There were several counties that did run that this year, and it was very well received. We'll be looking at running that on a more statewide effort starting in 2015-16 through a grant that Bonnie and David Cox received. And so you'll probably be hearing more about that later, as well as the online courses that Erica referenced. And then there's also, the one-on-ones and other things that us as extension educators do. Next slide. So I couldn't make this bigger, but I tried my best, and what I'm showing you here are just two examples of activities that we do within Annie's project that really help the women understand about bringing things back to basics and how they can integrate that with their own farm operations. So one example is reading financial statements, and then they're actually able to do their own farm financial statement. Many of these women have never done one, and so it's a really great learning experience for them to understand how things are categorized and why they're categorized that way. And going through that exercise really helps them feel like they have something more to contribute to the conversations at home. As well, then on the right, what we see is what we do at the very beginning, where they are assessing different risks at their own farm and what they can do to help mitigate those risks. So once again, we're helping them identify things that are actually happening on their farm, and so this is something that is specific to their farm. Next slide. All right, so there's many more resources than this for women in agriculture. I just was going through a very quick list. Sheila was talking about the very rough winter that we've had, and that's definitely true across the whole state. And so one of the really great resources is the New York Ag Mediation Center, as well as FarmNet, who've been doing a lot with areas as they relate with stress, Farm Credit East, lawyers and other professionals such as accountants. And these are all people that they meet through Annie's project, local Farm Bureau, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and then publications, not just the ones that are done through the Cornell Small Farms Program, but many women that we talk to say that a lot of the information that they feel is most useful they're getting from trade publications. So we wanted to make sure that we do bring that up as something that also has been found to be helpful by farm women. So that's what I had, the very, very quick and dirty, and I see we're at time, but if anybody has any questions, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Laura. So folks, I guess we did it in the time frame. If you do have any questions that you want to put in the chat box, that would be wonderful. We'll stay open just for a few seconds. If you need to hop off, that's fine too. Celeste has recorded this, so we have the opportunity to actually go through it again, which we could probably slow down a little bit and look at the slides that we have. So I hope that we all have a better appreciation for the work that's been done by the women that have presented today, and that on behalf of all the educators and participants in today's session, I'd like to thank you for participating and thanking Celeste for really shining the light on this opportunity to present on this very important topic. So thank you, Celeste, and thank you all.
Thank you to all of you. Yeah, this was great. There was a lot of information, but it was wonderful actually to have a variety of panelists and folks from outside of, outside of our typical cooperative extension network. So wonderful. Thank you all for participating. I just want to take a second to show you where you might find a recording and where you can find some other resources. Also want to ask our presenters if there is anything else, links or resources that you want to share. If you send them to me directly, I can put them up on the place where the rest of the resources for this webinar will be stored. Is everybody can you see, Bonnie, if you can let me know, can you see the Cooperative Extension staff site? Is that what you're looking at? Just confirm that for me if you would.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So if you go to the staff site, which is just staff.cce.cornell.edu, and under units, if you go to the Organizational Development and Accountability Unit, that's the unit that I'm a part of. In the right-hand side, the tools of the trade, the top, they're all organized, they should be anyway, by alphabetical order, yep. The top link there is Campus County Connections, and if you go to that link, that's where all of the resources for this series can be found. So this particular topic, the women in agriculture, will be found in agriculture and food systems. These are organized by our plan of work areas. I think they're pretty, it should be pretty obvious where things are. But at any rate, you'll see the description up top, and below is where you'll find the recording, you'll find the slides, and any other resources that might be shared about this topic.